authenticity and originality are like two core pieces you can't remove. I'm not talking about pulling a seat up to the table. I'm just build your own table.
Deniese Davis is a 4-time Emmy-nominated producer and founder, CEO of Reform Media Group, which recently inked an exclusive development deal with Tyler Perry Studios. She began her career producing music videos, short films, and digital content, including Issa Rae's award-winning web series, The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl.
You're not going to be able to fully change these company policies. Why continue to be disappointed and expect them to change for us when we have the power? One of the biggest draws with Issa, beyond the obvious of just her genius and what she was doing on a storytelling level at the time, she is continuing this notion that you can just be a good person in this business
and still win.
I believe wholeheartedly the answer is ownership.
To whom much is given, much is required. Part of that requirement is sharing. Culture is the heartbeat within our lives, and it's at the core of so many things. While we live in a time when we are starving for wisdom, I welcome you to your wisdom retreat at Culture Raises Us. When you hear culture, what does that mean to you?
A way of life, right? I think it's, you can say trend setting, but culture can be about community, but I actually think it's really about establishing a way of life and a way of defining life and people and certain decades, years, generations, ethnicities, right? Because I think oftentimes culture is defaulted to Black culture, but that's because we're the best at it. But at the same time, I think you have to remember that culture is a lot of things. It's all encompassing. And so what does it really mean? I think it means it's a way of how we live our lives.
I've known you for years, and I have to get the story on how you got into producing, because I remember meeting you in New York when you came to see your aunt, who worked at Jordan at the same time that I was at Nike, and LaShonda, who we love. Yes. Who's a great spirit. Auntie LaShonda, yes. Walk us through, how did you get here?
Oh, man, I'll give you the short spiel. So I am born and raised in Las Vegas. My Aunt LaShonda and my mom have been best friends since middle school, which has been a beautiful thing. And, LaShonda left Vegas and went to New York and pursued a career in fashion. And when I was 14 years old and a freshman in high school, one of the things I wanted to do was visit her in New York. I was like, I want to go see this place. And, Vegas, growing up there, I liken it to kind of a black hole of sorts because you're not around other major cities. And so you're kind of in your own bubble. And I'd been to LA with like family road trips, but I was like, I want to see what New York looks like. And so for my 14th birthday, my mom surprised me with a plane ticket to go visit LaShonda for spring break, freshman year in high school. And that was when we met. And I got to spend an incredible week with her and her sister, Tina Davis. And as a young, small girl from Vegas, like it changed my whole perspective. And two things really stood out to me. One was being able to see my aunt in these settings and in a career that I didn't know anyone who did fashion.
I was about to say, did you even know it existed?
No, right. I'm in Vegas. What? That's not really... I don't want to say it's not an option, but it's just not what you're around really in that way to know that it can exist. And so I'm watching her, I'm going to the offices, seeing what she's doing. And then one of the things she told me when I got there was like, hey, I took this week off from work, but my boss asked me to like do this one thing that came up. And I told him we were here. And he said, well, just take her. And it was, she had to style the halftime game for the Jordan Capital Classic in DC.
The high school, that's right.
And she was like, and I was like, what? So what, are we going to Washington? She was like, yeah, but you get to come with me. And so I got to go with her for that weekend, and we went to DC, and she was styling Ludacris and Bow Wow. And, 14-year-old Denise was like, Bow Wow! Yeah.
I love the 14-year-old Bow Wow!
Bow Wow! I mean, he was like 15 at the time, so I was like, what?
Right.
And I got to see what she did and just saw the inner workings of that entire tournament. And I mean, I went back to Vegas and everything looked different. Everything looked different. I just remember telling people like, yo, there's a whole world out there. Like, do you understand that like there's like so many things we can do? And coincidentally, I actually hadn't gotten into video production yet. That didn't happen until I was 16. And so when
I love not until 16.
Well, I mean, it's important because you should know. So I grew up playing basketball. I was a point guard. That was like, I had hoop dreams. And so, of course, like even getting to go to the Jordan Capital Classic was like amazing. One of the best things that I like to tell people, I'm like, do you know who the two biggest seniors were that year? And they're like, who? I was like, LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony.
That was a huge one.
It was a huge year.
Huge year.
And so I'm like with these players and hanging out and, you know, seeing all of this and seeing the media frenzy. And obviously you see what we always knew what they were going to become, but just see them now, it's like, oh man, that's crazy. 14-year-old me like saw that early on. And so anyways, all of this stuck with me. And I ended up quitting basketball after 16, mainly because I saw the path in which it was going and decided that I loved the game, but I wasn't in love with it enough to double down on what it was going to take. And I realized I was like, oh, I just love to play it, but I don't know if I'm that serious about it as a career. And so I never went back out for the team. I didn't quit. I just never went back out. And it was a huge identity crisis of sorts because I'd been playing since I was 7. That's what everyone knew me as this young basketball player. And that was my identity. And I spent a few months in school just being like, well, now what? And I ended up being in an elective that was doing video production and the daily school announcements for the first time. And I got to see what they were doing, similar to this, couple cameras, and was setting up kids with a desk and a green screen. And they were recording it in first period, and it was airing in fourth period throughout the school. And I was like, yo, this is dope. And that teacher kind of took an affinity in my interests and like, taught me how to edit, let me take the camera home from school and shoot videos with my sister and just figure that out. And he eventually came back and was like, I'm doing this class again, but I'm calling it part 2 and you should do it. And by my senior year in high school, I was producing and editing and directing our daily video announcements. And my new identity was, now I'm the video girl. I was doing videos for the high school counselors. They needed like registration videos to show the 8th graders who were coming into the school. So I would like do that with them or shoot a commercial for the dance team because they wanted to sell tickets to the recital. So I do a little commercial and drop it into the announcements. And so I'm having a lot of fun. But to be honest, I didn't have a context yet or any context yet about what do I do with this? I just found a new passion and was like, I love it.
And leaned into it.
And to go back to New York, my only goal from freshman year to senior year was, I don't know what it is, but or what I'm going to do, but I'm going to move to New York. And LaShonda and her aunt was like, or her sister Tina was like, that's cute, baby. You know, like supporting me. But we always laughed that like when the time came for college, I ended up applying and getting into Brooklyn College for film and came home that summer from visiting New York as a graduation present, had my acceptance letter packed up and moved in with LaShonda my freshman year in high school because she was like, come on, baby, you made it. And, you know, seeing how my career has taken me this far, we always laugh and joke and was just like, you were really serious. I met Bevy Smith when I was a freshman in high school too. And so when Bevy and I cross paths now, she's always like, my little lamb, you really just said you was going to do it and you just did it.
No, and I mean, and I have that feeling when I see you, when I reconnected with you, when we were at dinner and you told me all the amazing things you were doing, it blew my mind. But it also just took me back to the power of exposure. The power of exposure is so critical.
Yeah.
And tapping into your village who are giving you access. Access and exposure can do so much. And I look at your journey just to date and how impactful that has become. Because this journey probably would not have happened had you not taken that trip, had your aunts in play who were giving you line of sight to things that you didn't even know existed. I mean, I didn't even know my job existed.
No, I mean, I grew up in a city too where most people don't go to college and they go and make 6 figures, you know, serving cocktails. And that's fine. That's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that when you're in an environment where you're not shown other avenues and means of success, especially if you're an artist, especially if you're creative and you realize there's something more that you want to tap into, I think not being exposed to what those opportunities could look like, it makes it harder to be inspired and believe that you can do it, right? And so I think being just in, I mean, there's nothing like New York, right? Like you just be in that city
biased.
with that propulsiveness and that energy, and you just really believe like, oh, anything could happen here.
Possible.
And I'm always actually grateful that I did go to college there for 4 years first and didn't come to LA first, because I felt like it really gave me just such a great foundation for who I was becoming. And really helped me be like even more independent and just kind of learning how to kind of form a more of a rock shell of sorts. Because like, you know, New York, you got to kind of like be a little bit tougher than in other places just to survive and get through.
Yep.
And I really do think instilled so much in me as my journey just continued to evolve. But man, exposure is key. And even now with my change in my identity in high school, I'm a huge believer and supporter in mentoring and supporting programs with youth around the arts, because it's just like, no, if you don't expose that to them sooner, sometimes it's too late in college. I meet so many people in this business who went to school for something else, mainly because they didn't even get to be exposed to it until they were on a campus where they're majoring in science, and they're like, oh man, but I never thought about being a writer, because I didn't even realize like that was the thing. And then they sometimes feel like they're down a path and it's too late, you know? So
yeah, and you know, as you talk about your journey and the moments and the access that you were given to get here, now I look at, now that you're on this path of creative, building content, creating content, what was the moment where you realized just how instrumental and influential content was to shaping our overall culture, right? We talked about your journey, but now when did you have that aha moment, like, wait a minute, content really moves things in an impactful way? And it could be Black culture or Black content, however, but I'd love to get from you, what was that particular moment that you can reflect on?
I'm laughing because I'm like, ooh, which one do I want to share?
Yeah.
I'm going to share part one and a part two, because the part two is a little bit more personal.
Okay.
But part one is, I'm just laughing because I'm like, I'm about to pull people all the way back. The very defining moment, and even in my childhood, that I just distinctly will never forget is when MTV Films put out Carmen, a hip opera.
Who?
What? Oh, anybody else in this room? What? Carmen, a hip opera, Mos Def, Beyonce, Bow Wow. I mean, oh, we got to find this on YouTube. We got to put you on Game Master.
No, we got it.
I mean, here's the thing. That film, it's funny because I actually went to a rooftop screening and we saw it for the first time in years, like a year ago. And it still holds up, first of all. I was still singing and dancing along. But I just remember it being such an eventized moment, right? It was like just all this caliber of Black talent of that time. And the most incredible original kind of play off of the Carmen opera play. I think Robert Townsend directed it. And it was Beyonce in her first starring debut.
I do remember this.
Yeah,
Yes.
And it stayed with me for years afterwards. And I mean, this came out maybe when I was 12 years old, but it was such a cultural moment. And now I realize when I look back at like why, like it wasn't just the cast and like, you know, the entertainment value and the music, but part of it also was when you think about the year 2000, you're like, well, what else did we really have back then too, right? To be able to even make something that was so original in its form and to be able to be kind of put out on a big platform, because MTV put a lot of marketing into it. I never really looked up if it was considered a success for them, but I like to think it was. But it also, I think it was like, if you were there, you knew, you know? And I think now when I say it, people are like, oh yeah, like, because it actually doesn't even have replay value. It's not something you can go find on streaming right now. So it's like,
wow,
truly a cultural moment where you're like, oh no, that was a moment that.
For you.
Yeah.
Shift.
And just, you know, as someone who's a storyteller, I think too. So
That's
like
right.
the idea of like, oh, we could do that at that time was just really powerful.
Dope.
So that's part one.
Yes.
Part two is one of the first times I met Issa. And so I was getting ready to come out of grad school, was applying to freelance producing jobs. A friend of mine sent me one and I sent my resume to it. It was for a web series looking for a line producer. And, you know, we haven't really dived into my story, but of course I went to Brooklyn College for film for 4 years. Very diverse, very much a school of local New Yorkers, first-gen immigrants, and people who just were like non-privileged and just wanted to tell stories. Very different than like some of these other film schools. And then I went to grad school at AFI here in LA and did my 2 years and got my MFA in producing. And, I was the only Black female in my producing class of 28, and there wasn't a lot of people of color. And I tell you this context because I applied to this job for a web series looking for a producer, and I had a lot of producing experience. And I get an email back from Issa that was like, hey, I got your resume for this. Can you meet tomorrow morning for an interview? And I was like, absolutely. And so we set it up, and I remember being like, well, she still didn't tell me what it's for. I don't know nothing about who is who's emailing me.
Right.
So what do? You copy and paste and you Google. Yeah. And what I found was the first season of Awkward Black Girl, and also a lot of the other YouTube content, 'cause that was actually her third web series. And so I watched her other two and like read up on everything to date. And that moment changed so much for me, mainly because talking about these film school settings, unfortunately, a lot of the content and the things that I was around and helping with wasn't with us in it, right? When I look back, even my thesis film, sometimes I'm like, I didn't put no Black people in my thesis film. but you realize that you are in these settings and these traditional structures that unfortunately is not designed to be supported and have us in it. So I can't really beat myself up to be like, how could you not think about that?
No, you were falling within the programming.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, well, all the directors I had a chance to work with, there wasn't any ones of color. So, that's kind of where it starts, and to some degree. So yeah, watching Issa's web series was a huge watershed light bulb moment for me, because it was that moment where I was like, oh, we could do this, right? And then kind of reading up on the press about season 1 and seeing how big of a success it was becoming, and I'd already started to become, it was very, very defining. And from that point forward, I just remember showing up to that meeting, but I was like, this is the stuff I want to be a part of. This is what I want to be able to do. Like, have all this knowledge and skill sets and talent, and hadn't figured out like where do I want to apply it, and that was huge, huge for the culture.
I come from a time in an industry where it was very much built on, we'd say, product is king. And now I think we've obviously shifted into this era of where content is definitely king. And you are right in the middle, I think, of this major influence, as I call it. What are some of the non-negotiables that you look to identify for projects and opportunities kind of in this space, given that?
I mean, I think for me, just on a personal level, I am always looking at stories that I just feel like haven't been unearthed yet. I think it's so important to really try to find things that are bold and one might call risky, mainly because you're like, well, I don't have anything to compare it to. And to me, that's actually like the secret sauce, because I do believe in originality, being able to find success if you do it right and you do it for the right reasons, mainly because I think audiences like new things, as we know. And yes, they like things that, are sequels and maybe formulaic, but I do believe in authenticity and originality are like two core pieces you can't remove. And, the way I find authenticity in a script or in a story is, depending on who wrote it or where it came from, I always like to question, like, look, if I can take you as the writer out of this thing and have someone else write it, it's not authentic enough. This needs to come from a place that's personal to you, or that is connected to you in some capacity, that it can be duplicated. And it is only like you are the only person who could have generated this. And to me, that stands out and stands the test of time, because when you look at some of the great projects that are huge in our legacy and are in our libraries, like, it is usually the ones that you're like, I had never seen anything like that before, right? And that, honestly, I think that can apply to almost any creative medium, even if it's books, if it's sometimes podcasts, it's like, oh, you're touching on a subject that everyone's interested in, but no one sat down to talk about, right? So those are like some of the things that I'm always like seeking out, and it's never really like genre, or it's never like, oh, I like to focus on these type of stories. I'm just like, no, is it authentic? Is it original? And if it's familiar, how is it still different? Because it could still be nostalgic. It could still remind you of things. That's okay. But aside from that, then how does it stand out? How is it not like those things?
And I think as I'm listening to, it makes all the more sense as I know you obviously have a deep relationship with Issa Rae, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having worked on Insecure and co-founder with her on ColorCreative and the recent movie, which we'll talk about one of them days, to name a few. What was the draw, I would say, in working with a creative like this, and kind of where do you see the biggest opportunity for you both to now go in general with pushing content?
Yeah, I mean, early on, one of the biggest draws with Issa was beyond the obvious of just her genius and what she was doing on a storytelling level at the time that we met. But more importantly, she is one of the most down-to-earth humans I've ever met, and is tried and true in continuing this notion that you can just be a good person in this business
and still win.
And still win. And
still win.
And that's how I am. But it's so nice when you meet someone else who believes in that and moves with that and all that they do. And then the other thing is that look, I have no ambitions to write. I don't want to direct. I don't act. People ask all the time, you a writer? You want to? And I'm like, no, I just produce. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, her and I made such a great team early on, because it was like, I want to support your stories, your vision, your creative know-how, and execute and elevate it to the highest level. And so it really was such a great pairing, because that's kind of where I came at it from, which is like, I have a creative wherewithal and I can help with that to some degree, but ultimately it was so great to find someone who would be like, I want to do these sketches and like, do you think we can make them for this cost? And this is like our early web series days, and be like, yeah. And, and figure out how to make that happen, right? To kind of be someone who can come in and just be like, I'm going to help you figure this out so you don't have to do it alone. Mm-hmm. And kind of plug in the producing, logistic, budget, just all those things that she always would be like, I don't want to. How do I just create? Yeah. How do I just create?
Right.
So that's really what was such a great draw towards each other in those initial years.
Is there any correlation, and I think I'm answering the question because I feel like there is, to your sport background allowing you, look at the smile, look at that smile, allowing you to be this way? And when I say allowing you to be this way, there's such transferable principles when talking team sports and basketball in general, and you being a player.
1,000%. I've definitely thought about this, so that's why I'm smiling. So I'm like, yeah, I do believe that there undoubtedly some of the things that make me a great producer really were instilled in me early on from basketball. I was a point guard. Sometimes play the two, but I always played the one. Always bring the ball up court. And I ended up being a captain, co-captain of most of the teams I played with. And so you already innately have this leadership skill set that comes from sports, that more importantly, I think from a level of film and television, collaboration is so key. You do not do any project in this industry alone, period. I don't care what anyone says. It is not a one-man show. And so one of the biggest challenges I think most people face is really figuring out how to collaborate and work with a larger team to execute that singular vision. And it is not easy, because you could be on a film set where you have hundreds of people, thousands of people who are all there aligning around one singular creative vision, right? And so how do you as a producer corral the entire group who are all there for all the right reasons, and make sure we all stay on track and do our jobs to do that to the highest level? And in some ways it's like a point guard, right? Like, how do you keep your team 100%. Motivated and watching the court and knowing, where the ball should move and what plays to run, and being a captain of a team is also no small feat, because it's kind of bestowed on you to be a leader for your team, to set an example. And so I think all of that from my childhood, absolutely. I don't think I realized it till more recently, but it made me a better producer, because I just am like, I'm the captain,
I see that 1,000%. And you use the word collaboration within that. And I would love to hear, how did one of them days come together? Because I'm a huge fan of SZA. Yeah. Obviously, and of the project, and my girls are as well. Love. And it's great to see her kind of in this space and stretching her creative prowess. How did that come about when you talk about collaboration?
No, I mean, this one was a huge collaboration. So this was initially set up in 2018 with myself and Issa and our company ColorCreative. We did a writer's lab with Columbia, the studio, the original studio within Sony. And the lab at the time was designed to give 4 emerging writers a chance to develop and write an original feature script at a studio for the first time. And the idea was to really break barriers to, kind of help get their foot in the door, because it is hard for a young writer to have a studio buy their script. And so to kind of usher that in with the intention of it being an original idea. And so we got to do that with 4 writers back in 2018. And Sarita Singleton, who wrote One of Them Days, this was initially one of her projects. So this has been a long road to making it.
I'm glad you're sharing that as well, because people think these things are...
7 years. And within those 7 years, we spent the first few years getting the outline, getting the script right. And then who came first? I actually think Keke Palmer was the first attachment. And this was a few years ago. And Keke came on board and loved the script. And then shortly thereafter, we got Lawrence Lamont, the director, on board. And then the SZA piece kind of was the final piece. And, next thing we know, this time last year, we were like, oh, wait, are we making this? Because, it was... I like to say it's always one of those projects that post-writer's strike, I remember being like, I don't know how they're going to make this. Like, it had everything about it that you are told that Hollywood just doesn't make anymore, right? It was an original comedy movie, right? It's starring Black female talent. And Black female talent that, as much as we know and love them, hadn't yet really proven themselves to be leads in a studio theatrical film, right? Which is risky for at least from the studio's perspectives. And we had Lawrence, who's incredible and had directed with us on Rap Shit, the television show, but Lawrence had never done a movie.
Wow.
So you have all these pieces and an original, screenplay by Sarita. And when they were like, yeah, so how about this summer? It was like, are we for real? Right. And I just always joked that there was a point where I was like, well, I don't know. Let's just keep keep moving it forward until they decide they change their mind and see how far we get. And it just turned out to be such a wonderful experience. And I think the most rewarding thing was to see the success and the feedback of the film once it got put out there, mainly because it kind of, I think, is going to continue to be used as a test case and as a great example of like, if you, like kind of what we were talking about earlier, like if it exists, it can succeed. But if no one gives it a chance, then how are you to know whether or not it's going to actually, change the conversation? And I think the most rewarding part has been people who have mentioned to me that they are just so grateful and inspired that it exists, because it's kind of instilled hope that, like, look, this genre can stay alive.
That's right.
And that movies that are for our culture can continue to thrive and actually still be successful in a theatrical setting, because, these are the wins we need. This is what we need to, in order to show up and prove to them that, like, hey, there's an audience for this. And the minute that, they can point to too many failures, then the minute that they're not going to give us any more chances.
That's right. That's right. It all plays back to the points that you mentioned from the beginning, when you talked about making sure we're filling the space with things that are truly authentic, taking a risk, betting on ourselves. It all aligns. And as I look at, given the state of things where we are today, I look at what are the things you're specifically doing to ensure that the cultures and the spaces that you frequent are kind of being nurtured, supported properly, and what would you recommend other creatives and consumers to do in alignment with that? Because we're at a critical point.
We really are. But I think the most important thing is by showing up to do the thing, right? And kind of what we talked about earlier, not asking for permission. I think a lot of people want to be motivated to do more things within our culture, to create new spaces, to innovate. And part of that is always usually something that's stopping them from seeing it through all the way, whether it's funding, whether it's support, whether it's resources. And I'm a huge believer in being like, anything is possible. Anything is possible. You just have to sit down and be strategic and say, well, what's the bare minimum that I need and just for it to exist? Because, culture, it shapes so much in our lives, so much. And I think so much of what we touch as Black culture goes is truly like a leader in defining a lot of different areas. But what I always love when I peel those layers back is that it's usually things that are very innovative. And so it's like a reminder that it's like, yo, it's okay to take that risk. If you're just like, I'm scared because I don't see nobody else doing this and I know it sounds crazy, it's like, do it anyways. Because it's usually going to be the thing that now everyone is going to look to as a model, right? Like you will be the leading example, good or bad, but in a way that I think will inspire others to do the same. So that's one thing. And then one thing I do personally, in addition to that, is just, I mentor a lot. I always try to make sure I make time and space to make myself available to other people.
Pour into that next generation.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, look, I came up so aggressively and just being headstrong and honestly sometimes look back and say some of my best mentors were my peers, not necessarily people who had done it before me. Even though it's what I would have liked. I did seek out mentors and try to find people, but I think at the time there was this what felt like this true barrier, but generationally speaking, right? Of like these people felt so out of reach, but also so kind of disconnected from what I was coming out of in terms of the digital space and the content I was doing at the time. And so, I just make it a really good point just to even if it's 10 minutes to get on the phone with someone and answer their questions, because I recognize one, how much sometimes it just instills validation in whatever it is that they're doing, because I took the time out to even just like notice them and listen to them. And then the second part is just like, well, I hope it helps a little bit, right? And I tell people, like, I can't get you that job. I can't really see things through all the way. I'm not like a magician out here just like making shit happen. But what I can do is at least share or impart whatever wisdom or knowledge that I've learned in hopes that maybe it helps you maybe not make the same mistakes, but also helps you really figure out what your next moves are or how to do the thing that you're working on, just because you want to bounce it off of somebody else and get their feedback. Yeah,
even in you answering that, there's this notion of supporting diversity in a way, with pouring into the different types of people to take up space. And obviously, DE&I has been a buzz term recently in conversation. And when we look at DE&I and how it ended up really helping white women more than any other group, what are the things we need to do now to ensure that diversity, full diversity, is reflected in the spaces where we've made so much impact culturally, over the last couple of decades? I
mean, this is a topic we can talk about for a long
time. I know, but we got to plant these seeds.
We do, and I think what's so important is that, I think systemically, unfortunately, so many of where we are seeing just so much of, I think, the hurt and anger and just the disbelief in is this idea that I think we put too much faith in corporations. I think we put too much faith in, and forgetting that a lot of these companies are truly, honestly, not ran or owned by us, first and foremost.
1,000%.
They are operated by the wills of Wall Street, and some are privately held, but for the most part, they answer to these shareholders. And so if these shareholders and everyone is looking at this climate and saying, if we continue on this DEI route right now, it's going to hurt our pockets, so let's just tighten up and let's not deal with that right now. It's too sensitive, right? And it's not because they don't necessarily want to support. It's really about the money. As we know, everything's about the money. So what I see and what we can be doing or what needs to happen is, I'm a reformist. So I'm always just like, why are y'all trying to change the system when the system continues to show us that it is not for us? So why aren't we building our own tables? Like, I'm not talking about pulling the seat up to the table. I'm just like, build your own table. Build your own table. Find ways to compete and make others feel threatened, mainly because you have able to build something that is similar, but that can compete at a high level, but that also is built very differently. And I'm always looking at so many of our institutions that we put so much faith in. I'm like, guys, these have been around for decades.
That's right.
Decades.
That's right.
But what I also know is that it is time, what I believe in various sectors, it's like they are so ripe and vulnerable for people to come in and really kind of think of new ecosystems that could work better. I mean, we are living in this moment of, technology and social media and videography and AI and just like so many tools that unfortunately aren't even necessarily being utilized the right way or incorporated fully at a lot of these legacy companies. So what are we doing as the next generation and the ones behind them to really try to be smarter than the ones that are before us? Because I'm always like, look, you're not going to change the way people think.
That's right.
You're not going to be able to fully change these company policies unless you drag them to court. And nobody got time or money for that all the time. So why continue to be disappointed and expect them to change for us when we have the power to create change ourselves?
Be the change maker.
Be the change maker.
Be the change you want to see.
And I'm sure everyone's like, oh, that sounds so easy. It's like, yeah, well, have you tried?
Right.
Have
we
tried?
really
Have we really
tried?
You know, I believe wholeheartedly the answer to so many things is always ownership. And I think we are usually subjected to not be a part of that. I mean, I always look at, to some degree, like even what Jay and his team did with like Rock Nation. I'm just like, I don't think people talk about that enough, right? Like talk about building a table. So it's just like
disruptive.
So
disruptive.
What are we doing in our respective industries and the things that we work within to create our own lanes?
Yeah, the example you just used, and you know, talking about not pulling a chair up, but actually creating our own table, I think is going to be significant. I think is significant. And the more we can rally around that, as I don't want to say as easy as it sounds, but as difficult as it is, just because of all the years we've had of this programming of thinking we need to do it a certain way. But it takes risk takers.
It takes risk takers
to step out.
And it takes the people with the pockets, the deeply lined pockets, to believe in that too.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's some great allies out there that would absolutely support it if it exists.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Build it,
so
they will
allyship
come.
is big for you.
Allyship is huge because, you know, as much as I always believe like we got to support our own, I also think there's enough people who, especially in today's age or today's world, are willing to kind of, hold their hands across the table and help others build and support because they know. And I often think, generationally speaking, we are at a really interesting inflection point. I mean, political and otherwise. And I'm just like, I don't know if anyone's aware that like so much of this country and our world and the way we live our lives, even just culturally, to go back to culture, so much of it is going to continue to evolve very rapidly, really only in the next 10 years. And one of the reasons why is if you think of, you know, the powers that be, the leaders that be, where a lot of the money is. I don't know if you've been reading about the generational wealth transfer that's going to happen from one generation to the next over the next 10 to 15 years.
Are they looking at it being down?
Well, no, it's just mainly because a lot of, I think it's the baby boomer generation, they're dying off. They're in their 80s. And so people aren't paying attention to how we are at this inflection point in this country and really in the world where a different generation is moving on and the younger generations are moving up. And so truly, what does that look like when the younger folks, relatively speaking, are able to start being in more positions of power,
That's right.
are able to receive that wealth that their great-grandfather built for them. And I'd like to believe in some cases that, again, from an allyship perspective, I'm like, there's people from all types of walks of life who want to see and create real change.
That's right. That's right. You know, we always end these with, you know, asking the question of what 3 seeds would you want to leave with the stewards of culture moving forward? And I mean, you've dropped some really great ones already, but even the scenario you just walked through of the evolution of generations and the removal of some and the increase of others was even for me like a light bulb. Wow, great point. What would 3 seeds be for you?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of the recap from today. I would say number 1, innovation.
Innovation.
Number 1 is innovation.
Okay.
Be different.
Yep.
Right?
Not just for different purposes, but just be different.
Be different. Think differently.
Think differently.
Number 2 would be, sorry, I'm laughing, but within that, resourcefulness. I think for culture, so much of it usually starts small and is usually resourceful by all means. No matter which way you look at it, I always think it's something that's not talked about a lot, but be resourceful. And then the last one I think is, it sounds so cliche, but the word that comes to mind is like amplification. And the reason why is that I think culture needs to be heard, it needs to be seen, it needs to be felt. And in order to do any of those things, you do need to amplify the work that you're doing and whatever it is that you're, seeking out to do, setting out to do.
Well, I can't thank you enough for not only this conversation, but obviously your evolution.
Oh, thank you.
Your ability to take on the necessary risks to push the envelope and create new spaces or enlighten and expose people to spaces. That work is going to be so needed for all of us to move forward in a collective betterment standpoint and way. And I'm just super proud to see you in this space and support you moving forward. And that's why I wanted you in this space to kind of be heard and seen, because there's so many amazing individuals like yourself who a number of people don't even know this type of great work is being done by these type of people who've had these type of journeys to get here. So a sincere thank you, and you will always have a supporter here.
Thank you, Astor. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. Truly was honored to be asked to be here. And, someone like me, I just do the work. And half the time I forget people are watching. So I appreciate you for seeing me and for having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
We truly appreciate your support because it helps us fulfill our mission of promoting cultural awareness and personal development. Please click the subscribe button below to help ensure and solidify our mission.